Awesome. All righty. So I'm glad you guys are all here. Let's pop over to page 122, because what we're going to cover today is the chapter called The Family Afterward. And if you don't have your book to hand, don't worry. I'm gonna be reading a lot of it and then talking about a lot of it and then reading some more. So first and foremost, what I always want to do is talk about the title of each chapter. So chapter 9, The Family Afterward. These are directions and really talking about how we can overcome some obstacles that a family of an alcoholic might experience. Now, one of the things I want to point out, it says the family afterward. Afterward what? Like after what? So what we're talking about here is very specifically the challenges and really addressing the family after the spiritual experience has occurred. That's what we're talking about. And the reason that's important, because we're going to see, probably not tonight, although who knows, I have been known to do well with time. Stranger things have happened. But some of the directions or some of the things that people might encounter couldn't possibly happen before I worked through the 12 steps. And some of them would actually be incredibly dangerous, a direction to go if I haven't taken the 12 steps. So we're talking after we have worked these steps, after we've had the spiritual awakening, the spiritual experience. So that's what we're talking about. And as I go through, I'll keep reminding us after that, not after we come to 12-step meetings, after we ask somebody to sponsor us, not after we did our first 4-step, but after the spiritual experience as the result of all 12 steps. So it says our women folk. And I do know a lot of people like myself who do not appreciate being called women folk. I will say, though, I don't mind it. If you want to be like calling me women folk, I think it's delightful, but to each their own. So our women folk have suggested certain attitudes a wife may take with the husband who is recovering. And you know what's interesting is in this book, we talk about recovered. Oh, is that literally what you put in the chat? Hold on. Yeah, literally. So we're running on a great track mind. This is only one of 2 times in the book that the term recovering is used as opposed to recovered. And keep in mind, if you're new and you're like, hey, what's the difference between recovering, recovered? Recovered does not mean cured. Recovered means in a position of neutrality, safe and protected. Recovered means that the mental obsession has been removed. But it's talking about recovering. And the reason why is because the chapter we read and just wrapped up last week was 2 Wives. And in 2 Wives, we talk about how we can help somebody who is still suffering with the depths of this illness. And then it talks about directions after they've begun to come into recovery, after they've come to, 12-step or start to take some of the actions of this book. Yeah. And then one of the other places, it's a little more subtle. It talks about convalescing. Yeah. So the other time Scott's got for us is page 104 and a caveat at the bottom of the page. Delightful. Yeah. Also, we'll talk about how the alcoholic in this chapter will be convalescing as opposed to, I started that word and I didn't know how to conjugate it. Convalescent? Yeah, that's definitely it. Don't ask questions. Convalesced? Convalescituded? Yeah, definitely. But convalesce is to recover from illness. So convalescing would be still recovering. So one of those few places where it's spoken about. So yeah. And I love those nerdy little here's where. And in fact, so much that we're going to be doing some, here's where as we go through. So it says, perhaps they created the impression that he, as in the alcoholic, is to be wrapped in cotton wool and placed on a pedestal. Successful readjustment means the opposite. Oh, I don't know about you. I'm a little disappointed I don't get to be wrapped in cotton wool and placed on a pedestal. That sounds delightful. And actually, I do make the joke with my sponsees, do not put me on a pedestal. It's not wheelchair accessible. I shouldn't be up there. So it says all members of the family should meet up upon the common ground of tolerance, understanding, and love. And you know what's interesting about this common ground? We've spoken about this common ground before. In fact, we spoke about this common ground on page 118, and I'll read it very quickly. On page 118, it says, his ways of thinking and doing are the habits of years. Patience, tolerance, and understanding, and love are the watchwords. Show him these things in yourself, and they will be reflected back to you from him. And then, where else did we talk about this, common ground of tolerance, understanding, and love? Well, page 83. So I'll pop over to page 8. You don't have to pop with me, but page 83. And it's the bottom of the very first paragraph where it says asking. Anytime in this book it says ask or asking or we ask, that's a prayer. So this is I shouldn't say I'm always delighted when I find prayers like that. It's more like, oh boy, I'm excited because that's who I've become today. But it says asking each morning in meditation that our Creator show us the way of patience, tolerance, kindliness, and love. And so that being those ideals, being that common ground, aren't just the common ground for me, but they're the common ground for any of us that come to this book and read this book and follow these directions. Going back to page 122, it says this involves a process of deflation. Well, what needs to become deflated? My ego, my selfishness, my self-centeredness, my self-will, right? The 100 forms of fear, self-delusion, self-seeking, and self-pity, that needs to be deflated. And keep in mind, none of us like ego deflation until we've deflated our ego and we get the results of it. And it says the alcoholic, his wife, his children, his in-laws, each one is likely to have fixed ideas about the family's attitude toward himself or herself. Each is interested in having his or her wishes respected. I'm sure no one here has any idea what that's like to be a part of a family where there's strong opinions about how things should be done and really butting heads about certain opinions. And yeah, we know. And it ties so well in earlier in step 3 when it talks about how we want to wrest satisfaction and happiness out of this world. I need you to change your mind about me. I need you to change your mind about you. I need you to be who I need you to be. We're talking about that. And it says we find the more one member of the family demands that the others concede to him, the more resentful they become. That sounds familiar, doesn't it? I mean, not just from our experience, but also in what we're reading in step 3. And it talks about this makes for discord and unhappiness. And I mean, this next paragraph ties right into page 61. And why? Is it not because each wants to play the lead, right? The actor playing the director, right? I'm trying to manage the whole stage performance, telling you where you need to go, how you need to be. And man, I'll do it with the best motives. And it's not enough. It doesn't work. And it says, is he not trying to arrange the family show to his liking? I mean, it's for the best of everyone, but it's how I think it should be. I'm playing God. Is he not unconsciously trying to see what he can take from the family life rather than give? And if you guys remember in working with others, when we spoke about, really, I spoke about how this has been the freedom from social anxiety. Focus on what I can give to. Letting go of the results, but give to. How can I give? How can I help? Not fix, manage, control, but how can I serve? And that changes my relationship. Selfishness, self-centeredness, that is the root of my troubles. So I need to give selflessly from a God-centered, higher-powered centered, creator-centered place. That's selfless giving. And I'll tell you, I need a rigorous program of action to do that. I know you guys are all more spiritually fit than I am. And it says cessation of drinking is but the first step away from a highly strained, abnormal condition. And this is a theme that we've seen throughout the book. And part of, for those that are, just joining, or maybe don't know that, why is Paige bouncing around so much in the later chapters? The reason is because there's a common misconception that these later chapters are not relevant, or they don't contain direction, or they don't contain instruction. But we see themes that we've seen throughout this whole book carried through to right here. Sobriety is not enough. Abstinence is not enough. It was telling us that, and there's a solution, and it was telling us that into action when we're talking about step 9. Sobriety, abstinence is not enough. I need this way of life. And it says a doctor said to us that years of living with an alcoholic is almost sure to make any wife or child neurotic. And we don't really necessarily use the word neurotic in our sort of modern lexicon. We don't typically, oh, she's quite neurotic. Well, I mean, maybe you do. Maybe you do with your mother-in-law. That feels like a mother-in-law sentence. Although we ought to lead with the patience, tolerance, understanding, and love, But what we're talking about really, when we talk about neurotic, the word neurotic, I think, is probably pointing to that spiritual malady, that sense of separateness from God. You know how I feel when I'm separated from alcohol, I'm separated from substance, I'm separated from you, and I'm separated from God. That restless, irritable discontent, those bedevilments, and I'm feeling that sense of separation. That's what it's pointing to. And sorry, it's a lot harder to get to the chat. I got to do 2 clicks. And it says, I put everyone on a spectrum, whether they wanted to be on it or not. Yeah. It's like, listen, and that's the thing, the spiritual malady is not, see how I was saying how it doesn't take long for me to go on a tangent, just a little thing in the chat and off I go. But the spiritual malady is not limited to those of us who have alcoholism, or if addiction is what brings you to the study, it's not limited to just us. There are human beings on earth that have the spiritual malady, but the difference is they don't have the mental obsession and they don't have the physical allergy. And the last chapter we read was focused really on to the untreated Al-Anon, to the codependent. And they too suffer from that sense of separateness from God. Welcome. I'm glad those that just joined. We're on page 122. And it says the entire family is to some extent ill. Keep in mind, ill does not mean bad or wrong or shameful. Affected, right? The family disease of alcoholism. That's what they talk about in Al-Anon family groups. Even though one person drinks, or for this study, one person uses, all those around are affected. And we can ask, is that my experience? And it says, let families realize that as they start their journey, wait a minute, what is this journey that we're talking about? These 12 steps as a way of life, not just for me, but for all of us. That's the suggestion. If there is somebody I love that I can't help, the best thing I can do is work. It doesn't say work a kick-ass program. That's what I say. But it says work these steps. Have this experience. So this is the journey of living this spiritual way of life. And that's another theme, that this is not a set it and forget it program. I don't get to do this for, a week, a month, a year. This is a way of life. And that is why it's referred to as a journey. Again, I can be recovered, and I can be recovered very early on. But the spiritual way of life is just that, a way of life. So let families realize as they start their journey that all will not be fair weather. It's not going to be bright, sunny days. There will be struggles. And if you remember in 2 Wives, it said, this is as it should be. And it says that all will not be fair weather. Each in his turn may be footsore and may straggle. So as we commence on this journey, it may be hard to continue to trudge the road of happy destiny. We may have those days where life is hard and we don't want to pray. We don't want to inventory. Heck, the last thing we want to do is work with another newcomer or make that amends. We may straggle, or maybe we have a big emotional upset and our defects were pouring out of us and hurting others. We may straggle or be footsore. See, again, we're not meant to be perfect. It's spiritual progress rather than spiritual perfection. It says there will be alluring shortcuts and bypass down which they may wander and lose their way. I might want to cut corners with this thing, this spiritual way of life. And it says, suppose we tell you some of the obstacles a family will meet. And that's really what we're talking about in this chapter, some of the obstacles we experience. And it says, suppose we suggest how they may be avoided, even converted to good use for others. And that is a theme that we're going to see on the very next page. And the very next, I'm spoiling it, but the very next page is one of my favorite in the whole book. Keep in mind, I might say that about almost any page, but there are some promises on page 124 that are powerful and that I would miss if I didn't think these later chapters applied to me. So what we're talking about is the conversion of problems, of obstacles to good for others. Welcome, we're on page 123. It says the family of an alcoholic longs for the return of happiness and security. They remember when the alcoholic was romantic, thoughtful, and successful. Today's life is measured against that of other years. And when it falls short, the family may be unhappy. I don't know about you guys. Anyone do some inventory and find out that we got that ladder of comparison? You see where you put people on this hierarchy, this chart, that person's at the top and man, they're so great. Put them on that pedestal despite it not being wheelchair accessible. Or, that person, we're judging them, we're criticizing them, right? Just trying to give ourselves a little boost to better than ego. And again, maybe you guys are more spiritual than me, but I've seen that all over my inventory where I got this ladder of comparison. I'm judging and I'm seeing where I stack up and I'm seeing how things stack up. Because it's not how I think it should be, playing God. And it talks about how family confidence, today's life is measured against other years, and when it falls short, the family may be unhappy. Family confidence in dad is rising high. The good old days will be back, they think. Sometimes they demand that dad bring them back instantly. God, they believe, almost owes them this recompense on a long overdue account. Recompense is another word for amend or to pay back, right? So they feel like, we went through all of this difficult times, all of this hardship. We deserve the good times again. And regardless of whether or not I'm in a family situation or talking about a family situation, have I felt that way going through difficult times? Have I felt that way like, hey, I'm sober now. I should not be footsore and straggling. I'm sober. It should be smooth sailing. Hey, I made my amends. Why am I still having these moments of imperfection? What's going on? See, we don't call it imperfection, but we see this moment of humanity or these moments where life is on us and we don't get exempt from life because, that's a part of life. We're human beings and we're having that human experience. Welcome, we're on page 123. And so it says, but the head of the house has spent years pulling down the structures of business, romance, friendship, and health. These things are now ruined or damaged. I'm going to pop us over to page 21 real quick. I know I won't read all of it. Welcome. We're on 123, but I'm bouncing around to page 21 for just a sec. Glad you're here. So on page 21, when it talks about the real alcoholic, what we're talking about says he often, near the bottom of the page, he often possesses special abilities, skills, and aptitudes, and has a promising career ahead of him. He uses his gifts to build up a bright outlook for his family and himself, then pulls a structure down on his head by a senseless series of sprees. And if I pop over to page 82, we're talking about how we have ruined these structures. And page 82 is real fun because 82 is we're the tornado, right? So on the bottom of 82, it says the alcoholic is like a tornado roaring his way through the lives of others. Hearts are broken. I always say I broke those hearts. Sweet relationships are dead. I killed those relationships. Affections have been uprooted. I pulled them from the soil. Selfish and inconsiderate habits, mine, not theirs, have left the home in turmoil. We feel a man is unthinking when he says sobriety is enough. He is like the farmer who comes up out of his cyclone cellar to find his home ruined. See, I tore the structures down. And it says to his wife, he remarked, don't see anything the matter here, Ma. Ain't it grand the wind stopped blowing, right? So that's what we're talking about on page 123. That I have torn down these structures in my life time and time and time again. And it says it, back on 123 for those that are, with me as I bounce around. It will take time to clear away the wreck. It's going to take time. Now, keep in mind, it's talking about me. It's also going to take consistent action. The remorseful mumbling that we are sorry won't fill the bill at all. I need to take the lead. And so, though old buildings will eventually be replaced by finer ones, the new structures will take years to complete. And in that is a promise. The structures that we have of, the structures of romance, friendship, health, business, those structures will be finer structures. They will be rebuilt. Some of them will take time. And it's a reminder for those, like myself, who it took time to rebuild that trust, to make those amends with my family, and to demonstrate the change. That it doesn't happen overnight, but it does happen with consistent action. Sometimes that, yes, give me 1 second. Give me 1 second. Sorry, I just had somebody ask if I could rename them. And just so everyone knows, I'm on a different device, so it might be a little trickier than it was before. Give me a second. Participants. There we go. Give me 1 sec. And then boom, 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 boom. Got it. All righty. Thank you. We're doing the best we can. And actually, I don't think we're doing too bad. I won't say we, I'll say I need a lot of help, and I've been getting it. So thank you guys. All right. So it says, Father knows he is to blame. We're on page 123. Father knows he is to blame. It may take him many seasons of hard work to be restored financially, but he shouldn't be reproached. So it's saying like, hey, it might take a long time for that structure. So these different structures of our life, it may take a long time for that financial security to come back into place. And it's saying he shouldn't be reproached. So we shouldn't judge or criticize or condemn. But the wise family will admire him for what he is trying to be rather than what he is trying to get. And that's a theme that we're really going to be picking up here in the family afterward. And a lot in many areas of my life, I don't have a lot of the get. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't have the big fancy this or the big fancy that. I don't have those things. And I have had people reproach me. They criticize, they had people been like, you should be doing this or you should be doing that. But I don't think, at least in my experience, when I lean into the power that is the God of my understanding, that's not where I've been called to be. Where I've been called to be has been with you guys, helping people who have suffered the way I've suffered find a new way of life, to find a way out, to find freedom. It's not been about what I have or don't have financially. It's been all about that connection that I have with God, that relationship that I have with God, that I get to share with others. And just to continue on in this little tangent, we're gonna have lots of opportunities for this tangent in a couple pages, but just in and around this tangent. Many of the first one, or the co-founders, really, some of the first 100s did well financially, but our co-founders didn't. Our co-founders, Bill Wilson, on page 3, I had arrived. He didn't arrive financially ever again. In fact, he lost the home that he and Lois were living in sobriety. They were couch surfing in sobriety. Dr. Bob, he couldn't quite get his business back off the ground again. Fitz Mayo, one of the early members, and we hear parts of his story in this book. He was struggling financially, and we're going to read two employers, and that was a gentleman by Hank Parkhurst, and he had this company called Honor Dealers, and as he's writing two employers, that company is spiraling the drain. And you know, the effect that these human beings have had on I maybe shouldn't say our lives, but bear with me, our lives has been far more than the amount that they had in their bank account. And I think there's something more that's on offer. And I'll be honest, if you're just here because you want the 401k, we don't have those in Canada. We have other savings things. But if you're here for the 401k, or you're here for the money, or you're here for that, you know what? That's okay. In my experience, the steps don't care why I take them. If I take them, I will get well. And if I don't, I won't. And so if you're here for the money, that's cool. Be here for the money and you'll probably get it. But if you take these actions, you might get something more, right? For what he is trying to be. Anywho, now and then the family will be plagued by specters from the past. A specter is an old-timey word for ghost. So, you know, those ghosts of the past, those haunting memories of those things that we did. And it says, for the drinking career of almost every alcoholic has been marked by escapades. Oh, they were escapades, all right. Funny, humiliating, shameful, or tragic. The first impulse, and we can say, is this my experience? Was this my first impulse? Whenever a memory came to mind, is to bury these skeletons in a dark closet and padlock the door. Push it down, try to forget it never happened. The family may be possessed by the idea that future happiness can be based only upon forgetfulness of the past. And this is a stark reminder. It says, we think that such a view is self-centered and in direct conflict with the new way of living. Again, I always want to point out new way of life. And we're going to see in the next few paragraphs why this is in direct conflict. And man, these next few paragraphs, I shouldn't hype them up before I read them, because you know what they say, high expectations lead to resentments. But if they do, you guys get an opportunity to inventory me, and that'll take you back to God. So either way, I'm helping, or trying to hope to help. These paragraphs, man, I've done, sometimes when I get invited, I've done talks on these paragraphs because there's so much in them and they really are so, so powerful. It says Henry Ford, and it doesn't matter who said it. It really doesn't. It matters what was said. It said, once made a wise remark to the effect that experience is the thing of supreme value in life. It ties really well into who I'm trying to be rather than what I'm trying to get. Because what do I have to offer you? Simply my experience. I have a feeling, despite how great I think my ideas and opinions are, y'all don't care about them. What matters is my experience. And it says, this is only true if one is willing to turn the past to good account. So how do I take the mess of my past and turn it into a message of hope? That's what we're talking about. It says we grow by our willingness to face and rectify errors and convert them into assets. How do I grow? Not running like I want to, not burying it in a closet like I want to, but facing them. How do I face my errors inventory? And the inventory, fifth step, going through the process of the quiet hours, 6 and 7. And how do I rectify my errors? Steps 8 and 9, going out and making amends. That is how I convert them into assets. Assets. That is powerful. Defects to assets. And I don't even have to, do anything fancy. I just got to follow the directions in this book. And then it says the alcoholic's past thus becomes the principal asset. That is the main asset. And it's of the family. And frequently it's almost the only one calling us out a little bit. But I love that. The worst things that I have ever done, the most shameful things, those deep, dark secrets that I said I would never tell anyone, those things that I wanted to take to my grave, they become gifts, blessings, assets. I'm not going to trauma dump on you guys, but if there was ever anyone in this room that said, Paige, I needed me to share my deep, dark secrets, share with me those, or share with you those things that had happened to me, or those things that I had done, I could do so freely. When I sit down with another alcoholic, another addict, it's not my victories that help them. It's my failures. It's my hopelessness. When I talk about how once I start, I could not stop and I couldn't control the amount that I take. And I was like, yeah, me too. And when I talk about how I tried to stay sober on my own power, and I would try this and I would try that, and I talk about that insane thought that I would have that would take me back time and time again to that first drink, the first drug. And yeah, I had thoughts like that. And when I talk about that spiritual malady, I talk about that sense of separateness from God. I talk about that anxiety, that loneliness, and it's, yeah, me too. That's useful. And the reason it's useful is because that is not where I live today, because I have grown and been given this gift as a result of my ability and willingness to face and rectify those errors. And today, when I sit down with my sponsees, you know what's not helpful for them? They don't care what I'm like. Listen, I was so patient and loving all day. No, what helps them is when I fall short, when I was riddled with defect, and I can say, yes, me too. Here is what I did. So here is the path that we can take. And it's in this book. Absolutely. And it says the painful past may be of infinite value. Infinite. There's no limit on the value that my painful past, drunk or sober, high or clean, no limit to it. Infinite value to other families still struggling with their problem. We think each family which has been relieved owes something to those who have not. And I talk about that, like, I really owe a debt. And you guys don't have to owe a debt, but I owe a debt. But what happens for me is I try to repay that debt, and I try to repay that debt every single day. And you know what happens? The more I try to repay it, the further in debt I get. Because the more I try to give back to that which has so freely been given me, the more I continue to receive. That's what we're talking about. And it says, and when the occasion requires, each member of it should be only too willing to bring former mistakes, no matter how grievous, out of their hiding places. Showing others who suffer how we were given help is the very thing which makes life seem so worthwhile to us now. Back on page 52, I was in those bedevilments. I had a feeling of uselessness. Those feelings of self-pity riddled my life. And today, what has given my life meaning and purpose? Not what's in my bank account. I don't drive, so I can't even say not what's in the garage or on the driveway. None of those. But what has given my life meaning and purpose has been working with others. And again, and tying into that idea that sponsorship is not, keen or 12-step. Sponsorship is a minimum requirement for somebody like me. But man, if I give, I receive more than I could have ever imagined. And it is incredible. And it says, cling to the thought that in God's hands, the dark past is the greatest possession you have. Not that car that I don't have, but the greatest possession is my dark past, the key to life and happiness for others. With it, you can avert death and misery for them. I can help when no one else can. We can help when no one else can. And that gives our life meaning and purpose. And man, I love that in God's hands. For those that know, you guys have been coming for a while, I talk about that because that's one of those themes that when I saw it, I loved it. It talks about like in early, and there's a solution. What seemed at first a flimsy reed proved to be the loving and powerful hand of God. And then it spoke in amends about there was a gentleman who had to leave the outcome in God's hands. We just read in Two Wives that if a repetition of a relapse is to be avoided, we place the outcome in God's hands. And then in working with others, that in God's hands, man, my life is better than anything I could have imagined. And here my dark past, if I put it in God's hands, becomes that principal asset. And how do I take that dark past out of my hands? Because, man, when it is in my hands, I use that for not for good. I use that for rumination and self-hatred. I use it a lot for shame, and I will use it for suicidal ideation. But in God's hands, it is some of the most powerful thing that I could offer a newcomer, sponsee, somebody who is hurting or struggling. And how does it go in God's hands? These 12 steps as a way of life taken out of this book. I just love page 124. It is powerful. And oftentimes we'll hear that this was, it's a group conscious book. Sort of, yes. Bill did a lot of the writing. He dictated a lot of it to Ruth Hawk, who typed it out in the little office that they had for honor dealers until they lost that office and had to get a cheaper one. It was not going well financially for him. She was typing it out. But this next paragraph is probably one of the most clear examples of some group conscious editing that we see in the book. Because it kind of, and you'll know what I mean, because it kind of goes from like whiplash, where it's like, we share our dark past. And now it's like, hold on, it's possible to dig up past misdeeds so they become a blight, a veritable plague. So it's a little bit of whiplash. So probably what was happening was some group conscience and some people, probably not, if I were to guess, not in Akron, Ohio, but probably in New York, was like, hey, wait a minute, we shouldn't bring up, these, and it's just I just love that, because it's just an interesting thing where you can kind of tell, like, there might have been some editing and some real input from some of the first 100 members. So it talks about how it is possible to bring up past misdeeds so they become a blight, a veritable plague. For example, we know of a situation in which the alcoholic or his wife have had love affairs. And again, if they're talking about anything in this book, if I've experienced it, really what I want you to know is that we're not alone. So if we've been cheated on, or we've been the one to step out in the relationship, we're not alone. And there are directions on how to remedy that. There are directions on how to make that right. So it says, in the first flush of spiritual experience, again, this is the family after the spiritual experience. They forgave each other and drew closer together. The miracle of reconciliation was at hand. Then, under one provocation or another, the aggrieved would unearth the old affair and angrily cast its ashes about. Bringing up old things and throwing it in people's faces, that doesn't sound like me, I'll just cop to it. I know you guys are way more spiritually well than I am. And it says, a few of us have had these growing pains, and they hurt a great deal. Husbands and wives have sometimes been obliged to separate for a time until new perspective, new victory over hurt pride could be re-won. And that sense of sometimes it's good to separate. We see that in working with others, where in early when somebody's getting sober and working these steps, again, it does not take long to work these steps and have a spiritual awakening. Bless you. It does not take long to get well, but sometimes we need to take a step back from some of our relationships to be on a different basis, to re-engage. And so it's pointing to that as well. And it says, in most cases, the alcoholic survived this ordeal without relapse, but not always. So we think that unless some good and useful purpose is to be served, past occurrences should not be discussed. And then it goes on to say, and here's how it really feels like they just threw that paragraph in. We families of Alcoholics Anonymous keep few skeletons in the closet. So I just maybe you guys aren't as nerdy about this as I am, and that's totally fair and reasonable. On a nerd scale, I'm way up there, but I just think that's so interesting. So we families of Alcoholics Anonymous keep few skeletons in the closet. So what it's saying is that we tend to be quite transparent and open with each other. It says everyone knows about the other alcoholic's troubles. This condition, which in ordinary life would produce untold grief, there might be scandalous gossip, laughter at the expense of other people, and a tendency to take advantage of intimate information. Among us, these are rare occurrences. And that tells us the standard that we're being held to, right? That scandalous gossip, that laughter at the expense of other people and taking advantage of intimate information. That's not something I can afford to continue to engage in. And I'll be honest with you, we might not be able to just stop gossiping or just stop talking about other people. I might need God's help. And you know how God has helped me with gossip? Making amends for gossip. That defect fell away once I started to do that. And if you're ever curious or wondering how I, well, now I'm on the tangent, I might as well. I didn't find it particularly, and the advice I was given wasn't to go, hey, I was talking a lot of garbage about you. And I've had people make amends to me in that way, and I didn't find that helpful. But what I did was I started to compliment them and say genuinely kind things to their face, and start to say genuinely kind things that I truly meant about them behind their back. And that is a beautiful habit to get into, whether I gossip or not. So it says, among us, these are rare occurrences, but we do talk about each other a great deal. So there is discussion of other people. And that very human nature, man, I haven't seen so-and-so in a while. Is so-and-so doing okay? But it says, that we do talk about each other a great deal, but we almost invariably temper. So we do talk, but tempered. So matched with such talk by a spirit of love and tolerance. So if I'm not talking about how I can help, how I can offer them, how I can best be of use to them, I maybe ought not be talking about them. It's a really good gauge if I'm engaging in gossip. Is there a spirit of love and tolerance? Also, I will say there is a difference between a gossip and a 10th step call. So if I want to know the difference, am I talking through the columns? Have I gotten to where I have been the jerk in column 4? If I get there, we're working it out. So it says another principle we observe carefully is that we do not relate the intimate experiences of another person unless we are sure he would approve. So we're not talking about other people unless, especially, or if I'm talking about, so-and-so shared this in a 5th step. No, we're not doing that unless we have permission, unless, so again, gaining consent. But yeah, no, don't you worry. We're not doing that. So that's that guideline. And again, who would have thought directions and how we talk about each other in and around gossip so useful, and I would miss it if I didn't pop over to this chapter. And it says we find it better when possible to stick to our own stories. A man may criticize or laugh at himself and it will affect others favorably. But criticism or ridicule coming from another often produces the contrary effect. I don't know if you've ever been in a situation where people are gossiping. And of course, sometimes it feels really nice at first because, ooh, I'm a part of. Look, I'm climbing that social ladder. Ooh, tell me what's going on. But you'll notice that after that happens, we start to feel less secure. We start to increase our fear of judgment, our fear of criticism. And it really is when, it's not attractive, but I get to share my own. I get to be transparent about my defects of character. I get to share my shortcomings, and I get to share about me. And that is helpful and that is useful. It says members of a family should watch such matters carefully. For one, careless, inconsiderate remark has been known to raise the very devil. And it says, we alcoholics are sensitive people. Now, I won't ask anyone to do a show of hands of if you're sensitive. I'm sure no one can relate. And the reason I'm gonna not ask anyone to do a show of hands is because this was something that happened to me, and it ruined my day. So I might ruin your day, and I'm very sorry. Uh, and for a long time, I would joke about, I'm sensitive. Now, what I mean by when I would say I'm sensitive, I didn't mean I was crying at dog food commercials. What I meant is, you must be talking about me. That's sensitive. And I would kind of make that joke, I'm sensitive. And then somebody pointed out, Paige, did you know sensitive is a synonym for self-centered? It got me. It ruined my day. See, when I'm that sort of sensitive, when you walk into a room and two people are talking and we know they're talking about me and we know they're not talking good things, or people says something not at like, and I got to make it about me. That is self-centered. Man. And when I could see it for what it was, I could see the defect that it really is. And I'm real sorry for ruining all of y'all's day as well. But it was actually quite powerful for me. And so it says, it takes some of us a long time to outgrow this serious handicap. And that's what it is. Yeah, it's a big old defect of character that I got. And then it says most alcoholics are enthusiasts. How did they know? And one of the things I for those that have been around, you guys know I'm kind of a nerd about the etymology, so the origin of language and what words meant. And enthusiasm is Greek in origin. I can be wrong. I'm going off the top of my brain. Greek in origin. And one of the definitions of enthusiasm is to be filled with God's Spirit. And that's what we're called to do, to be enthusiastic about this way of life, right? But it's talking about most alcoholics, we're enthusiasts. We, rock and roll, most addicts, enthusiastic. We get a little fixated on stuff. So it's going to tell us two directions the people like us tend to go. And it's, again, going to point out after the spiritual awakening has happened. So at the beginning of recovery, again, after the spiritual awakening, a man will take, as a rule, one of two directions. Now, as a rule, like just from our experience, one, this is the first direction. He may plunge into a frantic attempt to get on his feet in business, or he may be so enthralled by his new life that he talks or thinks of little else. So diving right into the spiritual life, the spiritual way of life, diving right in. In either case, certain family problems will arise. With these, we have had, again, what are we offering? Our experience. So we have had experience galore. So the first place that it dives in is into the economic problem. And I'll point out, it says, we think it's dangerous. So we probably shouldn't dive into that. But we've got 5 minutes left, and that seems like a natural stopping place to me. So why don't we dive headlong into our economic problem next week? And I hope you'll all join us. So I'm just going to stop the recording and we can unmute. Absolutely.